Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling this question that was posed on Reddit, and it really got me thinking. It was, what gave you mental illness? And we've got a ton of responses from people sharing their experiences, and they're just incredibly raw and insightful.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating question. It really gets to the heart of the nature versus nurture debate. And as we dig into these stories, I think we'll find that they paint a really nuanced picture of, what can contribute to mental health challenges.
Okay, so let's dive in.
Yeah.
One of the most common things that I saw was the role of family and particularly parents.
Mm.
So many people describe challenging childhoods with parents who were maybe dealing with their own issues or just simply weren't equipped to give them the emotional support that they needed.
It's a powerful reminder that early experiences, especially those within the family, can really have a profound impact on our mental well-being. Those early relationships really lay the foundation for how we see ourselves and the world.
Yeah, and it makes you really think about the responsibility that we all have, not just as parents, but as a society, to create environments that foster mental health.
Absolutely. And it's important to acknowledge that sometimes mental illness isn't really something that individuals feel is given to them at all. Many responses talked about it as something that's just an inherent part of who they are, almost like a factory defect.
That's a really interesting perspective. It shifts the focus away from those external factors and more to something internal, something biological. Does that mean we have less control over our mental health than we think?
Well, it's a question that, scientists and philosophers have been grappling with for centuries. And while we don't have all the answers, it's clear that both nature and nurture are intertwined. It's not a simple equation.
Mhm.
Genetics might create vulnerabilities, but it's often environmental factors that trigger or exacerbate those vulnerabilities.
And that leads to another major theme that I saw, which was trauma. So many people described experiencing significant trauma, whether it was abuse or neglect or witnessing violence or just experiencing a major loss. It seemed like those events could leave really deep emotional scars.
Yeah, and it's not just scars. Trauma can fundamentally alter the way our brains work, impacting things like our emotional regulation, our stress response, even our ability to form healthy
It's
relationships.
heavy stuff. But what I found really interesting was that even amid these incredibly personal and often painful stories, there were glimmers of humor.
Hmm.
Some people use humor as a coping mechanism, making light of their struggles with responses like, my ex or even existing.
It's the resilience of the human spirit.
Right.
Even in the face of hardship, we find ways to cope, and humor can be incredibly powerful. It can help us process pain, connect with others, and just maintain a sense of perspective.
Yeah, it's a reminder that mental illness doesn't define a person. There's so much more to the human experience.
Exactly. And while we're on the topic of the human experience, it's important to highlight another recurring theme I saw, which was societal pressures. Many people pointed to the anxieties of modern life. The constant pressure to succeed, the financial strain, and even the divisive political climate.
It's like the world itself can contribute to a sense of unease and mental strain. So
Yeah.
where do you even begin to address that?
That's where the concept of social determinants of health comes in. Essentially, it acknowledges that our well-being isn't just about individual factors. It's also shaped by those larger social, economic, and political contexts that we live in.
So are we saying that fixing the mental health crisis isn't just about individuals getting therapy or medication? We need to look at that bigger picture.
It's about creating a society that prioritizes mental well-being. And that means addressing things like access to affordable health care, promoting economic security, and fostering a sense of community and belonging. These are complex systemic issues, but ignoring them means ignoring a huge piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so we've got family dynamics, trauma, societal pressures. It's starting to feel like everything's potentially contributing to mental illness. Where does that leave us?
Well, it leaves us with a more holistic understanding of mental health. It's not just about individual psychology, it's about that complex interplay of biology, personal experiences, and the world around us.
And that complexity is reflected in the diverse ways that people framed their mental health journey. Some people described it as a battle, others as a process of healing and growth. Some even saw it as a source of unique strengths and perspectives.
And what's fascinating is that there's no one right way to view or cope with mental illness. It's about respecting those individual narratives and understanding that everyone's journey is different.
It's about embracing that diversity and challenging this stigma surrounding mental health.
Absolutely. And that's where, open and honest conversations like this one that we're having today are so crucial. They help us understand those complexities of mental health and create a more compassionate and supportive world.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of support, If you're finding this deep dive as insightful as we are, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul podcast and check out our YouTube channel, Shauna Palaj, for more thought-provoking content.
We love exploring these important topics with you and creating a space for this open dialogue.
And there's so much more to explore. We've only just scratched the surface.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve deeper into some of those specific mental health conditions that were mentioned and explore what we know about their causes and treatment options. So stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into the causes of mental illness.
Reading through these Reddit responses, I was really struck by how many people mentioned feeling misunderstood or invalidated, by those closest to them.
Sadly, it's a common experience for people who are struggling with these mental health issues. The stigma that surrounds these conditions can make it so difficult to open up and seek support. And when our loved ones, dismiss or minimize our struggles, it can lead to those feelings of isolation and shame, which just compounds that internal battle.
Yeah. It's just heartbreaking to think about all the people are dealing with internally, and then they have to fight for validation externally, too.
This really highlights the need for education and awareness surrounding mental health. We need to break down those misconceptions and create those safe spaces where people can share their experiences without fearing judgment.
Something else that stood out to me was the number of people who talked about the impact of chronic illness on their mental health.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that our well-being is multifaceted. We can't separate the mind from the body. Chronic illness can trigger or worsen those mental health conditions, and vice versa.
It makes sense when you think about it. Dealing with a long-term physical condition can be incredibly stressful and emotionally draining.
It's this interplay between the physical and the mental that's often overlooked in healthcare. We tend to treat them as separate entities, when in reality they're so deeply intertwined.
And speaking of those external factors, a lot of people highlighted the role of work stress, financial strain, even the political climate in their mental health.
Yeah, it brings us back to that concept of the social determinants of health. The conditions in which we live, work, and play have a profound impact on our overall well-being.
So it's not just about individual resilience, it's also about creating a society that supports mental health, like a collective responsibility.
Exactly. We need to think about things like access to affordable healthcare, job security, safe living environments. All these elements can contribute to or mitigate mental health challenges.
It's like building a foundation for mental well-being, starting with those basic needs that allow individuals to thrive.
That's a great way to put it. And it underscores the importance of addressing systemic inequalities that can contribute to those mental health disparities. We need to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to flourish, regardless of their background or their circumstances.
Now, one comment that really got me thinking was from someone who talked about the impact of medication on their mental health. They felt like the medication, while it was intended to help, actually made things worse for them.
It raises a really critical question about the role of medication in mental health treatment. While it can be so helpful for some individuals, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And just like any medical intervention, there are potential side effects and risks that require careful consideration.
Yeah, it's a reminder that treatment should always be individualized, tailored to the specific needs and experiences of each person.
Absolutely. And it's so important to have those open and honest conversations with your healthcare providers about the potential benefits and risks of medication, as well as exploring those alternative treatment options.
I was also fascinated by the people who mentioned feeling mentally unwell after having like a spiritual awakening or experiencing a major life transition. It's almost like those transformative experiences can shake up your sense of self and lead to a period of, inner turmoil.
What's so interesting here is this idea that mental health isn't always about pathology or dysfunction. Sometimes it's about growth and transformation, and those periods of intense change, while challenging, can ultimately lead to greater self-awareness and personal fulfillment.
It's like shedding an old skin and growing into a new one. That process can be really messy and uncomfortable, but ultimately it's necessary for evolution.
Exactly. And it's important to have those support systems in place during these times of transition, whether it's therapy, spiritual guidance, or a strong community.
Reading through these responses, it became really clear that there's no single answer to the question of what causes mental illness. It's such a complex interplay of factors, both internal and external.
And that's the key takeaway here. We need to embrace this complexity. Instead of searching for those simple solutions, we need to acknowledge the multifaceted nature of mental health and approach treatment and support with nuance and with compassion.
I love how some people talked about mental illness not as a weakness, but as a source of unique strengths and perspectives. It's like,
Right.
yeah, it's a struggle, but it's also woven into who I am.
Yeah, there's a growing movement to reclaim mental illness as part of human diversity, rather than something to be ashamed of or hidden away.
It's about recognizing that people with mental health challenges have valuable contributions to make to society, and their experiences can really enrich our understanding of the human condition.
Absolutely. This reframing can help to reduce stigma and foster a more inclusive and supportive environment for everyone.
One thing that really struck me was the number of people who mentioned feeling mentally unwell after experiencing a major societal upheaval, like a war or a pandemic.
It's a crucial point. We tend to think of trauma as something that happens to individuals, but entire communities can be traumatized by these events like natural disasters, political violence, or economic collapse.
It's as if the very fabric of society itself is torn, and everyone feels the impact on some level.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of collective healing and addressing the root causes of that trauma, whether they're social, political, or economic.
I was also struck by the number of people who mentioned feeling mentally unwell after experiencing a major shift in their identity, like coming out as LGBTQ+ or transitioning gender.
It really speaks to the importance of affirming and supporting individuals as they navigate their own identities. When we're forced to hide or suppress who we are, it takes a toll on our mental well-being.
It's almost like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
You're finally able to be your authentic self, but then you have to deal with the reactions of others, and that can add a whole other layer of stress.
Absolutely. And this highlights the need for greater understanding and acceptance of diversity in all its forms. We need to create a world where everyone feels safe to express their true selves without fear of discrimination or prejudice.
You know, one thing that keeps coming back to me is the power of language. The way we talk about mental illness can either perpetuate stigma or promote understanding.
That's a powerful observation. We need to move away from language that pathologizes and dehumanizes individuals. Instead, we need to use language that's respectful, empowering, and acknowledges the individual's lived experience.
It's about seeing people as whole human beings, not just as their diagnosis.
Precisely. This shift in language can have a ripple effect, creating a more compassionate and supportive environment for everyone.
It's like realizing that the words we choose truly matter. They have the power to shape perceptions and influence how we treat one another.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of the language we use when discussing mental health. Another significant theme that emerged from these responses was the role of social media.
Yes, I was going to bring that up. It seems like people had very mixed feelings about it.
Understandably so, social media can be such a powerful tool for connection and community building, but it can also create those unrealistic expectations and foster a culture of comparison that can be so detrimental to mental health.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the highlight reel of other people's lives and feel like you're not measuring up.
Exactly. And this can be particularly challenging for young people who are still developing their sense of self and identity in a world that's saturated with these carefully curated online personas.
It's a good reminder that we all need to be critical consumers of social media and set those boundaries to protect our mental well-being. It's not always a healthy space.
That's an important point. Remember, social media often presents a distorted version of reality. Don't compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel.
I love that. Now, I was also struck by the number of people who mentioned feeling mentally unwell after experiencing a major change in their physical health, things like puberty or menopause. It really highlights how hormonal fluctuations can impact mood and emotional well-being.
It speaks to the interconnectedness of our physical and mental health, something we've talked about before. Hormonal changes can trigger or exacerbate mental health conditions, and it's vital to seek support and treatment when needed.
It's like our bodies are constantly changing, and sometimes those changes can throw us off balance mentally and emotionally. We have to be patient and give ourselves time to adjust.
Absolutely. And seeking support from healthcare providers or your trusted loved ones during these transitions can make a world of difference.
One thing that I keep coming back to is the importance of self-care. A lot of people talked about the positive impact of things like exercise, meditation, spending time in nature, pursuing creative outlets.
It highlights the power we have to take an active role in our own mental well-being. Self-care isn't selfish, it's essential. And it can look different for everyone.
Yeah, it's about finding what nourishes your soul and makes you feel grounded and centered.
Exactly. And it's about making time for these practices even when life gets busy and demanding.
It's interesting how some people talked about finding solace and support in online communities like Reddit itself.
It speaks to the power of shared experience and that human need for connection. When we feel isolated and alone, these online communities can provide that sense of belonging and validation, reminding us that we're not alone in our struggles.
There's definitely a certain comfort in knowing that others understand what you're going through. These online spaces can be incredibly valuable resources for information support and advocacy.
Absolutely. They help bridge the gap between feeling alone and feeling connected, which can be so crucial for mental well-being.
Despite all the challenges and hardships that people shared in their responses, I also noticed this consistent thread of hope, a sense that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit can find ways to cope, adapt, and even thrive.
It's a testament to the incredible strength and capacity for healing that exists within each of us. Resilience isn't about never experiencing hardship. It's about having the tools and support to bounce back from those challenges.
It's about navigating those ups and downs of life and coming out stronger on the other side. It's inspiring to see how many people have found that inner strength.
And while resilience can be cultivated, it's important to recognize that it's not something we do alone. We need support from others, whether it's family, friends, therapists, or our communities. We all need help sometimes.
Absolutely. We're all in this together, and we're stronger when we support one another. That sense of shared humanity really shines through in these Reddit responses.
This deep dive has been a roller coaster of emotions, hasn't it? Heartbreaking at times, yet also incredibly inspiring.
It's been quite a journey. It certainly made me think about the world in a new way, and it sparked so many questions that I'm eager to explore further.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives. They're not just about acquiring knowledge, they're about igniting that curiosity and encouraging us to continuously learn and grow. We're all on this lifelong journey of understanding ourselves and the world around us.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground, but there's still more to uncover. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll take a closer look at some of those specific mental health conditions mentioned in these Reddit responses and explore the latest research on their causes and treatments.
We'll also discuss the role of therapy medication and those lifestyle changes in managing mental illness, and we'll talk about how we can all contribute to creating a more supportive and inclusive society for everyone.
Stay tuned for that final part of our deep dive, where we'll wrap up our exploration of this fascinating and important topic. See you soon. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the causes of mental illness. We've covered so much ground, from genetics and trauma to the impact of society, and it's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating exploration. We've seen how diverse and individual the experience of mental illness can be, and how, those experiences are shaped by such a complex interplay of forces.
Absolutely. But one thing that really seemed to unite many of the stories that we've heard is this search for meaning. People want to understand why they're struggling, and they're looking for ways to heal and to move forward.
That really resonates with me. The desire to make sense of our experiences, particularly those that cause us, pain or confusion. That's just a fundamental part of being human.
So in this final segment, let's maybe shift gears a little bit and delve into some of those specific conditions that were mentioned by those Reddit users. Maybe by exploring what we know about their causes and treatment options, we can shed some light on those paths to healing.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Well, depression seemed to be a recurring theme. It felt like almost everyone on that Reddit thread had experienced some form of it at some point in their lives.
Yeah, that's not surprising. Depression is one of the most common mental health conditions worldwide. And as we've discussed, it's often triggered by this complex combination of factors.
So let's break that down a bit. What do we know about the causes of depression?
Well, research suggests that genetics play a role, so people with a family history of depression might be more susceptible to developing it themselves.
Right.
But having a genetic predisposition doesn't mean you're destined to experience depression. Environmental factors like trauma or chronic stress or major life changes, those are often the triggers that activate those vulnerabilities.
It's almost like genetics load the gun, but it's those life experiences that pull the trigger.
That's a powerful analogy. And it highlights the need to address both biological and environmental factors when it comes to treatment.
Speaking of treatment, what are some of the options available for people who are struggling with depression?
Well, therapy is often a cornerstone of treatment. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is one approach that's been shown to be quite effective. It helps individuals identify and challenge those negative thought patterns that contribute to depression.
So it's like rewiring your brain to think more positively.
Well, that's a simplified way of putting it, but it captures the essence of CBT. It's about developing healthier coping mechanisms and reframing those negative thoughts.
What about other types of therapy? Are there approaches that focus on different aspects of depression?
Absolutely. Interpersonal therapy, for example, focuses on addressing relationship patterns and those unresolved emotional issues that might be contributing to the depression. Psychodynamic therapy kind of delves into those unconscious processes and past experiences that might be influencing current struggles.
So it seems like there's a whole spectrum of therapeutic approaches, each with its own kind of unique focus.
Exactly. And the choice of therapy really depends on the individual's needs and preferences, as well as the therapist's expertise.
Now, a lot of people also mentioned taking antidepressants. Where do those fit into the treatment picture?
Antidepressants can be really effective in alleviating the symptoms of depression for some people, but it's important to remember they're not a cure-all. They work by adjusting the levels of certain chemicals in the brain, neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, which play a role in mood regulation.
It's like giving your brain a little chemical boost.
In a sense, yes, but it's essential to work closely with a healthcare provider to find that right medication and dosage because antidepressants can have side effects and they may not be suitable for everyone.
It sounds like finding the right treatment for depression is a very individualized process.
It absolutely is, and it's crucial to remember that recovery from depression is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, effort, and support.
Another condition that came up a lot in the Reddit responses was anxiety. People described feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, and constantly on edge.
Yeah, anxiety is a normal human emotion, a natural response to perceived threats or stressors. But when it becomes excessive, persistent, and interferes with daily life, it can be a sign of an anxiety disorder.
So the key difference is the intensity and the duration of the anxiety. Right?
Precisely. And as with depression, anxiety disorders can stem from a combination of those genetic and environmental factors. Some individuals may have a genetic predisposition to anxiety, while others might develop it in response to specific life events or stressors.
What are some of the ways that anxiety manifests? I imagine it can look very different from person to person.
That's true. Anxiety can manifest in a variety of ways, both physically and mentally. Some people experience physical symptoms like a racing heart or shortness of breath or digestive issues. Others might struggle with persistent worries, intrusive thoughts, or that sense of impending doom.
And what about treatment? Are the approaches for anxiety similar to those for depression?
There are some similarities. Therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, is often the first line of treatment for anxiety disorders. CBT helps individuals identify and challenge those anxious thoughts and develop coping mechanisms for managing those anxiety symptoms.
So it's about learning to control the anxiety rather than letting it control you.
That's a good way to put it. It's about empowering individuals to recognize and manage their anxiety triggers and develop strategies for navigating those challenges.
Are there other types of therapy that are effective for anxiety?
Absolutely. Exposure therapy is often used for phobias and other anxiety disorders that involve specific fears. It involves gradually exposing individuals to their feared objects or situations in a safe and controlled environment, helping them to reduce their anxiety response over time.
That sounds like it takes a lot of courage.
It does, and it's important to work with a therapist who's experienced in exposure therapy and who can create that safe and supportive environment for that process.
What about medication? Is that an option for anxiety as well?
Yes, medication can be helpful for some individuals in managing the symptoms of anxiety. Antidepressants are sometimes prescribed for anxiety as they can help regulate mood and reduce those anxiety levels.
I've also heard of anti-anxiety medications. How do those work?
Anti-anxiety medications like benzodiazepines work by slowing down the central nervous system, which can reduce feelings of anxiety and tension. However, they're typically prescribed for short-term use because of the potential for dependence and withdrawal symptoms.
So it's important to weigh those benefits and risks carefully when considering medication for anxiety.
Absolutely. And as always, it's crucial to have those open and honest conversations with a healthcare provider about the potential benefits and risks of any medication.
You know, one theme that really stood out to me in these Reddit responses was the prevalence of trauma as a root cause of mental health struggles.
Yeah, that's not surprising at all. Trauma, whether it's a single event or ongoing exposure to adverse experiences, can have such a profound and lasting impact on our mental and emotional well-being.
It seems like trauma can really shake the foundations of who we are.
Trauma can affect our sense of safety, our relationships with others, and our ability to regulate our emotions and cope with stress. It can lead to a range of mental health challenges, including, PTSD, anxiety, depression, and substance abuse.
So how do you even begin to address something as deeply ingrained as trauma?
Well, trauma-informed care is essential. This approach recognizes the impact of trauma and emphasizes safety trust collaboration and empowerment in all interactions with individuals who have experienced trauma.
So it's not just about treating the symptoms, but about understanding that underlying trauma and creating a safe space for healing.
Exactly. Trauma-focused therapy is often a key component of treatment. It helps individuals process their traumatic experiences in a safe and supportive environment and develop coping mechanisms for managing those trauma-related symptoms.
Are there specific types of therapy that are particularly effective for trauma?
Yes, several therapies have been developed specifically for trauma. EMDR, for example, is a technique that uses bilateral stimulation, like eye movements, to help individuals process traumatic memories and reduce their emotional intensity.
That sounds interesting. Are there other approaches?
Another therapy that's gained recognition for trauma treatment is somatic experiencing. This approach focuses on helping individuals release that physical and emotional tension that's often stored in the body as a result of trauma.
It seems like there's a growing awareness of the mind-body connection in trauma treatment.
Absolutely. Trauma doesn't just affect us mentally and emotionally, it also impacts us physically. These body-based therapies recognize that and help individuals reconnect with their bodies and release that trapped trauma energy.
Now, another condition that came up in those Reddit responses was bipolar disorder. People talked about experiencing those extreme highs and lows in their mood and energy levels, which sounds incredibly challenging to navigate.
Bipolar disorder is a serious mental illness that's characterized by these dramatic shifts in mood, energy, and activity levels. It's often misunderstood, and people with bipolar disorder can face significant stigma and challenges in their lives.
So it's more than just mood swings, as some people might think.
Much more, bipolar disorder involves these distinct episodes of mania or hypomania, which are characterized by elevated mood, increased energy-racing thoughts and impulsive behavior, and episodes of depression, which are characterized by low mood fatigue, loss of interest, and feelings of hopelessness. These episodes can vary in intensity and duration, and the experience of bipolar disorder is really unique to each individual.
What do we know about the causes of bipolar disorder?
Research suggests that genetics plays a strong role in bipolar disorder. Individuals with a family history of the condition are at a higher risk of developing it themselves. But as with other mental illnesses, environmental factors can also contribute to the onset and the course of bipolar disorder.
So it's another example of that complex interplay between nature and nurture.
Precisely. Stressful life events, substance abuse disruptions, and sleep patterns can all trigger those episodes in individuals with bipolar disorder.
And what about treatment? How is bipolar disorder managed?
Treatment for bipolar disorder typically involves a combination of medication and therapy.
What types of medication are used?
Mood stabilizers are often the cornerstone of medication treatment for bipolar disorder. These medications help to regulate those mood swings and prevent both manic and depressive episodes.
It's like finding that middle ground, so you're not constantly swinging from one extreme to the other.
That's a good way to think about it. Mood stabilizers can help to create more stability and predictability in mood and behavior.
And what role does therapy play in managing bipolar disorder?
Therapy can be incredibly helpful in addressing the challenges of living with bipolar disorder. It can provide individuals with coping skills for managing those mood swings, strategies for reducing stress and improving sleep, and support for building those healthy relationships and routines.
So it's about equipping individuals with the tools and support they need to navigate those ups and downs of bipolar disorder.
Exactly. And it's about fostering self-awareness, acceptance, and resilience.
You know, listening to you describe these different conditions, I'm struck by the complexity and the profound impact that they have on people's lives. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But I think it's important to remember that despite the challenges and the stigma surrounding mental illness, there is hope. With the right support and treatment, individuals can and do recover, and they go on to lead fulfilling and meaningful lives.
That's such an important message. It's easy to get caught up in the darkness of these conditions, but there's always light to be found.
Absolutely. And that light often comes from connection, from reaching out for help, from knowing that you're not alone in this journey. And that's what we've tried to highlight throughout this deep dive, the shared humanity of these experiences.
This deep dive has truly been an eye-opening experience for me. It's made me think about the world in a new way and appreciate the strength and resilience of the human spirit.
I couldn't agree more. And I hope our listeners have gained some valuable insights as well.
I'm sure they have. And if you're out there listening and you're struggling, please know that you're not alone. There are resources available, and there is hope.
Reach out to a trusted friend or family member, connect with a mental health professional, or explore those online communities and support groups.
And remember, seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the causes of mental illness. We hope it sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to learn more about mental health and to advocate for yourself and others.
And before we go, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul and check out our YouTube channel, Shauna Pelage, for more thought-provoking content like this. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone, and remember, you are not alone.